The camera was rolling when Damon Cross spotted the elderly black man near the cage. "Grandpa lost your way," he sneered, kicking gloves across the canvas. His team laughed. Social media waited for content. Then the old man took off his jacket. In 5 seconds, Cross was tapping out to a wrist lock that made the gym fall silent. The man straightened his collar and said his name, Laurentius "Grip" Hale, retired catch wrestling legend. That clip ended a career before it began. Nobody saw it coming. Laurentius Hale had been building champions for 4 decades without ever needing a spotlight. The internet wanted to laugh at the old man, but the old man was about to teach the fight world a lesson it hadn't signed up for. That 5-second tap wasn't luck. It was the moment a carefully constructed image collided with a lifetime of quiet, undeniable mastery. To understand what really happened, you have to go back to the gym long before the cameras ever showed up. Damon Cross had built his career on moments like this. 26 years old, undefeated in the welterweight division, a record of 11-0 with 9 finishes. But the numbers only told you part of the story. The real engine was the content machine that hummed behind everything he did. His YouTube channel had 400,000 subscribers and climbed by the day. His Instagram was a relentless highlight reel of spinning elbows, liver shots that folded men in half, and the kind of trash talk that blurred the line between confidence and cruelty without ever fully crossing it until it did. His team called the strategy building the brand. A fight career didn't sell just off wins anymore. It sold off moments. The gym that afternoon was the Hammer House, a converted warehouse in North Las Vegas with a full competition cage, a wall of mirrors, heavy bags hanging like sides of beef, and the distinct smell of sweat and rubberized flooring that had absorbed more ambition than sorrow over the years. But more important than any of that, the gym was packed with cameras. A local media crew was filming a feature on Cross's upcoming main event callout. His sponsor, a supplement company, had a videographer in the corner grabbing footage for a lifestyle spot. 2 podcasters sat cageside with microphones, and at least half a dozen phones were already recording. This open sparring session wasn't about training. It was a stage. Cross had already beaten up 2 local prospects that morning, younger fighters who had been brought in to make him look unstoppable. The first one ate an overhand right in 38 seconds and didn't get up smiling. The second lasted a minute and change before a knee to the body ended the exercise. Each finish came with a running commentary Cross delivered into the nearest phone, a steady stream of taunts and predictions about what he would do to the division's ranked contenders. His team howled. The comments on the live stream flooded in with fire emojis. Everything was going exactly to script. Then he spotted the old man. The man was sitting on a folding chair near the back wall, half in shadow, wearing a gray sweatshirt that had seen better decades and sweatpants with a faded stripe. He held a cup of coffee in both hands, black, no sugar, and he watched the cage with the kind of stillness that doesn't announce itself. He hadn't come with a fighter. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He just sat there observing, the way a stone observes water moving around it. To Cross, the man looked like a custodian who had wandered into the wrong room. To a handful of older coaches who had been around the sport long enough, the face was a memory they couldn't quite place yet. Cross grabbed the wireless mic from the cage post and pointed at the man. His voice carried effortlessly through the cheap speaker system. "I know times are tough, but the senior center is 2 blocks over." The room laughed. Cross grinned, scanning for the camera with the best angle. "Grandpa, you lost your way. You even know what this cage is for." The man said nothing. He set his coffee down on the floor beside the chair, stood up slowly, and removed his jacket. He folded it with the kind of care that suggested the garment might matter more than the room. Then he stepped forward. Cross kicked a pair of sparring gloves across the canvas. They skidded to a stop at the man's feet. "No extra charge, old man. Come feel what a real athlete can do." The laughter swelled. Phones lifted higher. The live stream numbers ticked upward. And then the man stepped through the cage door. He didn't stretch. He didn't wrap his hands. He just looked at Damon Cross with the entirely unbothered expression of someone who had spent 40 years disarming men twice his size and didn't need to prove it anymore. The whispers started before his name did. A retired cutman near the lockers went pale. An assistant coach who had trained under catch wrestling royalty in the 80s grabbed the man next to him and said a name so quietly it sounded like a prayer. Laurentius Grip Hale. Laurentius Grip Hale. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The younger fighters looked at each other with blank confusion. The older coaches felt a chill. The man who had kicked the gloves across the canvas did not register the name. All Damon Cross heard was silence where laughter should have been, and it annoyed him. He gestured toward the old man with both hands, a universal invitation for an opponent to meet him in the center of the cage. "Come on, let's get this over with. I got content to make." Hale stepped into the cage without hurry. He did not bounce on his toes. He did not raise his hands in a guard position. He simply stood at the edge of the canvas, hands at his sides, and waited. Cross circled left, then right, feinting with quick jabs, the showman already performing for the phones. The first real strike came fast, a low calf kick designed to buckle the old man's leg and open him up for a highlight reel head kick. Hale did not check the kick. He did not move his leg. He moved his entire body weight onto the other foot, let the kick land harmlessly against the meat of his calf, and in the same fluid motion, his left hand closed around Cross's trailing elbow. What happened next was too fast for the phones to track clearly in real time. Cross's forward momentum became his undoing. Hale dropped his own weight, pivoted on the ball of his foot, and rolled his wrist in a motion that looked almost lazy. A Russian tie, a grip that coaches drill into green prospects for 3 months before they even learn what it's called. Cross's arm extended at a sickening angle, his body twisted off balance, and then he was on his back on the canvas, Hale's knee planted squarely in his armpit, a wrist lock so deep that every knuckle in Cross's hand turned white. The tap came before the pain signal even traveled up the ulnar nerve. 3 quick slaps on the canvas, then a desperate, frantic drumming. 5 seconds from kick to submission. The gym fell into a vacuum of silence, the kind that swallows sound whole. Hale released the hold, stood up, straightened the collar of his sweatshirt as if he were adjusting a tie, and looked down at Cross. The younger man was lying on his back, chest heaving, eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief that no amount of media training could mask. Hale did not offer a hand. He did not say anything. He walked to the cage door, stepped out, picked up his coffee cup from the floor, and turned back toward the room. "My name is Laurentius Hale. I coached this sport before you were born. You'll want to study what just happened before your next fight." The phones recorded all of it. The production cameras captured it in high definition. The live stream, which had been pumping nothing but bravado and highlight finishes, now broadcast a champion on the rise flat on his back, tapping to a man in his 70s who had not raised his voice once. The chat exploded. At first, confusion, then disbelief. Then the screen filled with laughing emojis, questions, and the rapid spread of a single name: Grip Hale. Within an hour, the footage had been ripped from the live stream and uploaded to every major MMA forum. Reddit's MMA subreddit pinned the clip to the top of the page. Twitter fight journalists who had been writing puff pieces about Cross's championship future scrambled to pivot. By the time the sun set over the Vegas desert, the clip had 2 million views and counting. Damon Cross's image, the carefully curated persona of a trash-talking knockout artist destined for a title shot, had been replaced by a single freeze frame. Him on his back, arm twisted, mouth open in a silent scream. His main event call-out, scheduled to be the lead story on a major sports network the next morning, was quietly pulled. 3 sponsors emailed his manager that night asking to see the full footage and, in thinly veiled corporate language, hinting that their partnership might require reevaluation. But the internet, as it does, did not stop at the humiliation. It dug, and what it found was a legacy that Cross had walked into blind. Laurentius Grip Hale had not just conditioned 3 generations of world champions. He had built the grappling foundation for some of the most feared fighters ever to step into a cage. In the 1970s and 80s, he ran a small gym in Columbus, Ohio, a cinder-block building with no air conditioning and a mat that smelled of liniment and old sweat. There, He taught a style of catch wrestling that combined brutal joint locks with the fluidity of a chess master. His list of students read like a who's who of mixed martial arts royalty, men and women who would go on to win titles across every major promotion. They called him Grip because once he grabbed you, you did not escape. He never sought publicity. He had no social media, no branded gym, no online coaching course. He simply taught, and when he had taught enough, he faded into a quiet life of early morning walks and the occasional visit to old students who still trained. The only reason he was in that gym that afternoon was because one of his former proteges, now a coach in North Las Vegas, had invited him to watch a young prospect who reminded him of a fighter Hale had trained 30 years ago. He had been sitting in the back, invisible, until a man with a microphone decided he needed content. The next morning, Cross's camp released a statement. It was short, defensive, and avoided the word embarrassment with the precision of a lawyer who understood liability. The statement claimed Cross had been caught off guard, that the exchange was unsanctioned, that the old man had used a dangerous technique that would never be allowed in regulated competition. It called for the footage to be taken down, citing the fighter's right to privacy. The internet responded by sharing the clip 40,000 more times, but the real damage had not yet begun. Something else was brewing behind the scenes, something that would turn a viral humiliation into an existential crisis for everyone involved. And it started with a phone call Cross made that he assumed no one would ever hear. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. It was made from Cross's personal phone to the owner of the Hammer House Gym, Marcus Cole, at 11:47 that night. Cross assumed the conversation was private. He was wrong. Marcus Cole had been recording all business calls for the past 3 months after a dispute with a former partner over a lease agreement, and the software was still running. What Cross said in those 4 minutes would prove more damaging than every single frame of the cage footage combined. The audio file leaked 3 days later, dropped into a Discord server by an anonymous account, and picked up within minutes by the same fight journalists who had been covering the story. Cross's voice, unmistakable, raw and unguarded, cut through the speaker with the kind of venom that doesn't get softened by PR teams. He called Hale a washed-up nobody who got lucky. He demanded that Cole scrub the security footage from the gym's internal cameras that had captured the entire exchange from 3 separate angles. He threatened to pull his training camp out of the facility, to sue for defamation if anyone at the gym spoke publicly, and to blacklist Cole from every major promotion in the industry. And then, in the final 30 seconds of the call, he said something that would become the defining quote of the entire scandal. The old man didn't win. I let him do that, you understand. It was content. I gave him the moment. Nobody actually believes that Fossil could tap me for real. The internet did not need an interpreter. Within an hour, the phrase Fossil was trending alongside a dozen remix videos that overlaid Cross's voice on footage of him tapping out in 5 seconds flat. The defensive statement his camp had released the day before collapsed under the weight of his own words. 3 more sponsors terminated their contracts before the end of the business day, issuing carefully worded emails that referenced alignment issues and brand values. The supplement company that had paid for the videographer that afternoon posted a single sentence on their official account. We stand with respect for the sport and its legends. They did not mention Cross by name, but the damage was no longer confined to Cross's reputation. The audio recording had named Marcus Cole and the Hammer House Gym directly, and that meant institutional consequences were now in motion. The Nevada State Athletic Commission opened a preliminary inquiry into whether the gym had permitted an unsanctioned physical altercation involving a non-licensed individual on its premises. The commission's regulations were clear. Any facility operating as a professional training venue was required to maintain strict protocols around sparring. An elderly man who had never held a fighter's license in Nevada had been invited into the cage, had engaged with a licensed professional, and had been recorded. Whether it was a joke or not did not matter to the letter of the law. Cole faced fines, a potential suspension of the gym's operating license, and the very real possibility that his business, which relied on hosting pro camps, would be blacklisted by managers unwilling to risk their fighters' eligibility. Cole, a 60-year-old former boxer who had poured his life savings into the Hammer House, sat in his office the morning the inquiry was announced and stared at the wall. The framed photos of fighters he had hosted, the signed gloves, the posters from local shows he had sponsored, all of it suddenly felt like evidence in a case he had not asked to be part of. He had not invited Damon Cross to turn his gym into a reality show. He had agreed to the open sparring session because Cross's manager had promised exposure that would attract new clients. Now the exposure was threatening to bury him. And then the fighters began to speak. The first was a man named Javier Rojas, a former welterweight champion who had retired from the sport 3 years earlier and now ran a youth wrestling program in Arizona. Rojas posted a photograph on his Instagram, a 30-year-old snapshot of himself as a teenage kid, skinny and uncertain, standing next to a younger Laurentius Hale in a gym in Columbus. The caption was one word: grip. Then he added a longer statement in the comments. This man taught me how to control a human body without breaking it. He taught me that strength meant nothing without leverage and leverage meant nothing without patience. I owe him everything. What happened in that cage was not luck. It was 40 years of practice, and you disrespected it for a 5-second clip. Rojas's post was shared 80,000 times in the first hour. Other retired champions followed. A current UFC light heavyweight contender, a man known for his devastating ground game, posted a video from his kitchen. He held up his phone to show the now famous freeze frame of Cross tapping out and laughed for a solid 10 seconds before speaking. People been asking me about that clip. Let me tell you something. Grip Hale taught my coach who taught me that wrist lock. I've been trying to hit that for 8 years and I still can't do it that clean. That man is a wizard. Y'all thought he was a janitor. That's the problem right there. Cross's team scrambled. His manager released a second statement, this one longer and more contrite, carefully worded to acknowledge the contributions of pioneers in the sport while stopping short of an actual apology to Hale himself. The statement said Cross had been operating under the intensity of training camp and had made remarks in a private call that did not reflect his true feelings. The internet responded by creating a supercut of Cross saying the word fossil 27 times in a row set to elevator music. It got 4 million views. Behind closed doors, Cross's camp was fracturing. His head coach, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt named Victor Almeida, had spent his entire career studying the catch wrestling lineage that Hale represented. Almeida had watched the clip in silence, then watched it again, and then sat down and wrote a letter. It was not a public letter. It was a private message sent through mutual contacts to Hale himself, apologizing on behalf of his gym, acknowledging that what Cross had done was an insult to the entire grappling community. When Cross learned about the letter, he fired Almeida on the spot. Almeida posted a brief statement confirming his departure and adding only this: "Some arts are older than your career. You don't get to rewrite them with a microphone." The gym became a ghost town. Fighters who trained at the Hammer House began quietly relocating to other facilities, not out of loyalty to Cross, but out of fear that the commission's inquiry would expand. No one wanted to be caught up in a licensing investigation. Marcus Cole sat in his empty front office and calculated how many more weeks he could keep the lights on. And then, on the 5th day after the incident, a development arrived that no one had anticipated. It came in the form of a registered letter delivered to the Hammer House, addressed not to Cole, not to Cross, but to the gym's front desk with a simple handwritten note attached. For the young man who needed content. The letter was from Laurentius Hale. He had written it by hand, on lined paper, in careful cursive. And in it, he made an offer that would force Damon Cross to confront not just the consequences of his humiliation, but the deeper truth of what he had walked into that afternoon. The commission could fine him, the sponsors could abandon him, the internet could meme him into oblivion, but the letter would require something of him that none of those forces could compel. It would ask him to decide who he really was. The cameras were waiting. The letter was 2 pages, written in a careful, unhurried cursive that seemed to belong to a slower century. Hale did not threaten, did not gloat, did not demand an apology. He offered an invitation. The old gym in Columbus still had mats on the floor, he wrote, and he would be there the following Saturday at 8 in the morning. If Cross wanted to understand what had happened to him in the cage, he could show up. No cameras, no phones, no entourage. One morning, that was the price. The last line of the letter was not a challenge. It was simply a date and a time, followed by 5 words: come alone or don't come. Cross read it 3 times in the front seat of his car in the Hammer House parking lot, the engine off, the Nevada heat pressing against the windshield. The letter offered him nothing that would rebuild a brand or reclaim a lost main event slot. It offered something far more dangerous, an encounter with the man he had tried to erase. His new manager, a crisis PR specialist brought in after the audio leak, saw the paradox immediately. If Cross ignored the letter, the internet would label him a coward. If he accepted, he risked walking into a setup. She proposed a counteroffer, a carefully produced video documentary, cameras from both sides, a narrative of redemption and cross-generational respect. Cross would appear humble, Hale would be positioned as a mentor, and the footage would be sliced into a comeback story. She sent the proposal to Hale's contact. The response arrived the next day in an email that was exactly 7 words long. Those terms are not acceptable. Have him come. Or do not. The internet, as it always did, learned the broad strokes before the principals could control them. A gym employee who had seen the letter envelope on the front desk posted about it on a private forum. Within hours, speculation was everywhere. Would Cross show up? Would he apologize? Would there be a rematch? The pressure became a kind of slow-motion deadline. Cross spent 2 days in his apartment, curtains drawn, refusing calls from journalists, refusing calls from his mother, who had seen the clip and asked quietly over voicemail if he was okay. On Friday night, he made the decision. He would go, not for the cameras, not for the brand, because he had been unable to sleep for a week, and something in Hale's handwriting made him feel like a child who had been called to the principal's office and knew precisely why. He flew to Columbus alone, landing before sunrise, and drove a rental car through streets that had not changed much since Hale's gym first opened its doors. The building was a low-slung cinder block rectangle on a street of warehouses and empty lots. The sign above the door was hand-painted, the letters faded but legible. Hale Catch Wrestling, S. 1974. Cross stood in front of it for a long moment, a man with 11 professional wins and 9 finishes, reduced to hesitating on a sidewalk. Then he pushed the door open. Hale was sitting on a wooden bench, lacing a pair of wrestling shoes that were older than Cross. He did not look up. He gestured to an identical pair laid out on the mat beside a folded gi. Put those on. Cross obeyed. The mat smelled exactly like old sweat and liniment, the authentic smell of thousands of hours of honest work. Hale stood and began to walk Cross through the wrist lock that had ended the confrontation. He spoke about weight distribution, about how the human wrist could rotate along 3 axes but could not resist pressure applied along a 4th. He described the mechanics in the patient, exact language of a man who had been teaching for 40 years and had learned that precision, not volume, was what stuck. Then he told Cross to try it on him. Cross hesitated. Hale extended his arm without a trace of fear. Go ahead, I'll resist. Let's see if you paid attention. Cross applied the lock. Hale did not tap, but he nodded slowly, then showed him 3 counters in succession, each one a small masterpiece of leverage and timing. For 2 hours they drilled, no cameras, no phones, no Instagram story waiting at the end. Cross tentatively tried sequences, got reversed, tried again, and began to understand for the first time that fighting was not simply a contest of athleticism, but a language passed down through lineages that had existed long before he threw his first punch. Hale never mentioned the gym incident, the viral clip, the audio leak, or the sponsorship losses. He simply taught. At the end, he sat down on the bench and motioned for Cross to sit beside him. Hale reached into a small wooden box on the shelf and pulled out a black and white photograph, creased and yellowed. It showed a young man in a wrestling singlet, arm raised in victory, standing next to a younger Hale. The young man's face was sharp and confident, with a jawline that Cross recognized immediately because it was his own. "That's Daniel Cross," Hale said. "Your grandfather. He was my first student in this gym. I taught him the same lock I used on you last week. He passed away before you were born, but he used to say that one day he'd bring his grandson here to learn. I've been waiting 50 years for you to walk through that door. Not like this. Not to be humiliated, just to arrive." Cross stared at the photograph. His grandfather's eyes looked back at him, a stranger he had never known but whose blood ran in his veins. He tried to say something, but language failed him, and perhaps that was the point. He sat in the silence of the old gym and let the weight of it settle. The story of that morning did not appear on any podcast or YouTube channel. Cross walked out of the gym with no footage, no statement, and no plan. 2 weeks later, he withdrew from his scheduled main event bout, citing personal reasons that he never elaborated on publicly. The promotion filled the slot with a replacement, and Cross's name slowly receded from the top of the rankings, then from the rankings entirely. His last post on any social platform was a photograph of the old gym sign, the painted letters catching the morning light, with a caption that consisted of 2 words: "I'm sorry." Laurentius Hale never sought the spotlight again, but the spotlight found him anyway. The photo of the gym sign went viral in its own way, and fighters began making pilgrimages to Columbus to train in the cinderblock building. Hale taught them all, charging only what they could afford because that was how he had always done it. The video of the 5-second tap remained online, but its meaning shifted over time. It was no longer about a loudmouth's humiliation. It was about the day an old man reminded an entire sport that greatness does not announce itself with a microphone. It walks quietly, folds its jacket, and waits. The clip got millions of views because people love watching a loudmouth get humbled. But the reason it stuck, the reason you're still thinking about it right now, is something deeper. Damon Cross didn't just lose a sparring match. He crashed into a wall he didn't know existed, a lineage of knowledge passed down hand to hand, generation to generation, in gyms that never had cameras and coaches whose names never trended. Laurentius Hale never needed a platform because the work was always the point. He didn't seek revenge. He offered a lesson. And when Cross finally showed up, it wasn't for content. It was because he had nowhere else to go except toward the truth. We all carry assumptions about people based on what we see. Age, appearance, the quiet ones who don't announce themselves. Most of the time, those assumptions are wrong in ways we never get the chance to correct. Sometimes the person we dismiss as irrelevant is the very person who holds the key to a past we didn't know we had. The thing you overlook today might be the teacher you've been waiting for your whole life. Pay attention. Drop a comment with the moment you realized you had underestimated someone who turned out to be a giant. I read every single one. If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the one that matters. And if you're not subscribed yet, stay close. There's another story coming next week, and it's one you won't want to miss. Until then, may you never mistake a folded jacket for an empty threat.